Okay, and welcome everyone again to Rebels with a Heart. We're blessed and honored that all of you have joined us today, especially our guest speakers. We're really excited to introduce you to them. And our topic today is Beyond Pride, the Great Embrace. And I have lots of action-packed questions and kind of provocative questions and details to understand about our speakers here. So I'm going to open up the floor and allow them to introduce yourselves in alphabetical order, which we have today, the three J's, which I think is fun. So we will start with you, James Stevens. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Abetha Stevens, and I'm first and foremost excited to be on this webinar podcast. I have two awesome colleagues and just getting to know them before. And what's important about the three of us, we all have different stories. But if you can gain a nugget of something that we say to either make you a better person or to make your organization better, that's our hope and that's our spirit to you, is that we hope that you get that and spread it. So first and foremost, I just want to put it out there. So my story is I wear multiple hats. I am the Chief Human Resources Officer at New Mexico Wellness Center, which is a large mental health agency here in New Mexico. I'm also a mental health therapist. So I do have my clients, and I see clients on bereavement and substance abuse and career counseling and couples counseling and LGBT plus issues. So along with that, yes, I know it says in my bio that I'm retired. I'm also the SHRM New Mexico State Council Director. And that's important to New Mexico and to me because I'm the first openly gay, male, and male SHRM New Mexico State Council Director. Previously, it's all been wonderful females that have led SHRM New Mexico. And for me to step into the role, the way that I think and the stories that I have and the challenges that I've overcame as a human being and lifestyle and in experience can help our organization grow. And being a retired human resources director, I have those experiences to help people see things that they may not see because we're bogged down in process and we're bogged down with operational things that sometimes process oversees people. Well, I'm here to say that people are important and everybody has a story, as you will hear. My colleagues and I got to meet in person in New Orleans for the very first time, I think, for the entire history of the podcast, for a panel to meet in person. And let me tell you, I was floored of their experience, and I'm honored to be sitting amongst them to give information to you. So my background, I have over 20 plus years in Native American human resources and tribal human HR and tribal land, which, if you know anything about tribal land, it is something totally different being on sovereign land, the reservation, than it is on the outside world. And how we changed a culture is what I want to give you today. Changing a culture with my story and along with some buy-in from our CEO and an amazing executive team that may not have always seen eye to eye, but on people we did, and how we went from a low performing organization that needed a complete overhaul to one of the top organizations in New Mexico year after year after year after year. And we did that with tenacity, with heart, and we made sure that each individual person can tell their story. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm excited to answer questions and pass it over to Jeff. Right? Jeff is next. Jeff,
hey,
you were a bite in the Oreo cookie.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jeff Nally. It's good to be with you all today. I'm an executive coach and a professional speaker about the neuroscience of leadership, how to use your brain to not be a jerk at work. I'm also the chief HR officer and the chief coaching officer at CoachSource, the world's leading and most experienced coaching firm to companies across the globe. I've been in HR for more than 25 plus years. And my very first job was actually leading HR and the entire operation for an HIV/AIDS organization that ran homeless shelters in Kentucky. I led HR at manufacturing and healthcare companies, all in rural areas across the US. So I know what it's like not to be in a big city around the rest of your LGBTQ plus friends. My husband and I just celebrated our 30th anniversary. And our son, who we adopted when he was 9 months old, is turning 22 in just a couple of weeks. So that is a That's overwhelming. I mean, when he's old enough to give me fancy cufflinks for Father's Day, suddenly you're like, yeah, he's an adult, even though you think he's a kid. Like everyone else here, I've volunteered to advance the HR and, in my case, coaching professions. I'm the president-elect of the International Gay Coaches Alliance, and I volunteer as a member of the board of directors at the Society for Human Resource Management Foundation, where we fund scholarships and programs to help diversify everyone's workforces and make a world of work that works for all. I live in Venice, Florida, and it's a sunny 91 degrees. Yes, it is summer here, but I am not complaining. It's great to be with all of you.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff, and congratulations as well on the 30 years. That's a big deal. So well done. Julie, passing it over to you.
All right. Well, how do I follow these two impressive gentlemen? My gosh. Hi, my name is Julie Develin. I am, I would never choose this background. I am in Atlanta right now in a hotel room, so I'm just throwing that out there. But I live in Maryland. I grew up in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area. I work for UKG, Ultimate Kronos Group, which is an HR software company, and I am what's called an HCM strategic advisor. In my role, I do a lot of speaking at HR and business and payroll and other conferences. I do a lot of writing. I host a podcast. I do a lot of webinars, help salespeople, all of that. My background's in HR. I spent over 17 years as an HR VP. And I'm also a college professor in HR. I've been doing that for over 16 years. So HR is near and dear to my heart. And, you know, outside of work and everything like that, I love sports. And I love to travel. I travel a lot for my job. And I've been fortunate to see much of the country. So it's been great being back to the travel world, but really looking forward to this conversation today.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here, Julie. And again, for the audience, I'm Derek Lundsten, President, Chief Cultural Officer of LifeGuides. We're a technology platform that matches people who have been through a life experience event or challenge and are on the other side with those who are going through that same experience themselves to ultimately help them be happier, healthier, more joyful, and to reduce necessary suffering. We help organizations and cultures do that. It's all about changing the culture, as you highlighted, James. So I think it's an important piece. And ultimately, I'm an advocate for equality and for inclusion and for people to have the opportunity to achieve their dreams, whatever that may be in their life. And I think this is an opportunity to talk about that in a very real, frank way. So blessed to have you guys all on the show. Thank you. I say guys because I'm from New Jersey, so that's non-gender specific. So with that, I will just say, James, you're also the most active retiree I know. So, you know, just to put that out there. So I think, why don't we start off, you know, the title of this session is called Beyond Pride, the Great Embrace. I'm curious, you know, each of you represents a different perspective, a point of view around diversity and through the LGBTQIA plus community. I'd love to hear a bit more about your personal journeys through both life and business and how you've seen Pride Month and all the different elements around Pride evolve over the last 20, 30 years. Because I think it really, I mean, even in the last few years, I believe as a leader and what we see in the culture, significant changes that I've seen in the short term, but I don't think that that's happened necessarily over decades. And so maybe I'd love to hear, I think it's hopeful to help educate people, because I think there's a lot that I'm still learning, even as a leader and as an advocate and an ally. So I think for people who are not as immersed in the culture, I think it'd be very helpful. So I invite each of you to share that in whatever way feels right for you.
Sure, I'll start. So I think, you know, Pride Month and Pride parades are so important just to be visible. But when we think about organizations, I can't think of anything that's more powerful to me than to see at Pride parades employees marching in matching shirts behind the banner of the logo of their company. Yes, companies like to hijack Pride Month and fly a rainbow flag for a few weeks. But when you see the live humans who are LGBTQ plus in an organization, and the organization being willing, and this is still not happening in a lot of communities or a lot of companies, being willing to have employees walk behind their company logo, that's what's powerful. I've been to a few Pride parades in the past, well, not during the pandemic, but before then, and this year, where it's not so many employee groups. And that's really hurtful to me, because we have a lot of groups that get together because they want to be, but workplaces are really unique. So I want to encourage, first of all, that employee resource groups and network resource groups, if they don't exist in your organization, that is a keen first step way to make sure LGBTQ plus voices exist, are heard, and can collect in a safe place and in safe conversations in your workplace. And if they're not marching behind your company's virtual or in-person banner in a pride parade, it's so powerful to other coworkers and other applicants and the communities in which you work. Don't give that up.
Yeah, and if I may add, it is very important, and I'm very fortunate to work for a company like UKG who actually does sponsor pride events. I've actually had the opportunity this year to visit 2 different very large prides. I went to Miami Pride, and I just got back from Indy Pride, and wow, Indy Pride was huge. And UKG, you were mentioning you didn't see a lot of companies, Jeff. There were 250 vendors there, and there were several companies, big name companies. It was really great to see. It was the largest Pride I've ever been to in Indy, and the representation was great. So at UKG, we partner with the Miami Heat basketball team, and we partnered with them to actually have a bus in the parade. So our logo was everywhere. So I think that it's very important, the representation, just for folks to feel included and to feel accepted. And I do also agree that there are some companies that do take advantage of it, but I think for every company that, that's taking advantage of it, there are several more that actually do have a great mission-driven approach to inclusivity.
I agree. And I'll jump in this conversation. So I'm going to take a different perspective. And if you see on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the social media, there's companies out there that got their logo and they put the rainbow flag behind the logo, but that's an outward perspective. Now, if the 3 of us, Julie, myself, and Jeff, were consultants for your organization, and we went into your organization and polled and asked questions to your employees, would what they say actually match the logo with the rainbow on the outside? Remember, we're looking at the inward. So things are so important for HR professionals and CEOs and managers right now, because representation does matter, like my 2 colleagues were talking about, but it goes a lot further than that. I just got back from New Orleans and SHRM 22, and we went to New Orleans. Pride was out there coincidentally, and it brought tears to my eyes seeing how many HR professionals were lined on the street for Pride. That it just blew my mind, and it made me excited about human resources again, going from personnel to paper pushers into being culture leaders. What we do can impact that individual person working for you. Now let's talk about policies. In your policies, do you still have male, female, gender specific verbiage? Are you still portraying to your organization, if you have an event or a dance, to bring your wife or your husband? What about spouse or partner? Do you have gender neutral bathrooms? Are you really doing events that will show that each individual person is welcome? For instance, during Gay Pride, something simple as an ice cream social and serving rainbow sherbet. What about stickers on the outside of doors for allyship and a safe place? What about non-gender specific uniforms? Those types of things that as HR professionals and management leaders, we need to start thinking about and looking at it, because these are leaders of tomorrow. And as an HR practitioner and a therapist, it is my job for advocacy and awareness for different population groups. And if you have not researched LGBT, I recommend you do so at the humanrightscampaign.org, hrc.org. Get the stats, understand who's working for you and who identifies with what. So I love Jeff because he has his pronouns, he, him, his, on his name. something that I should have done as well. So pronouns matter, they count. It's all about identity. So let's open that. What is identity?
Yes. Go ahead, James. I think you would keep going with it because I think that's a really relevant topic. I mean, I think this is the topic around pronouns is something that I think is not necessarily widely understood by people, and the importance and the significance of that. Let's walk through that. Let's talk through that for the audience.
You know, for me, I was taught early on in my HR career, and even as a senior HR person, that we we need to establish 3 pillars as characteristics for ourselves. That's to educate, motivate, and inspire everybody that we come into contact with. And the big one is educate, in this case for pronouns. And there are many pronouns out there. There are glossary terms that we all need to be aware of, but sometimes it takes that HR professional to step away from their process of FMLA and recruiting and employee relations to really educate themselves on why pronouns are important. And it is definitely identity. For instance, does anybody know what cisgendered means?
Please educate.
Yeah, I actually pulled, being an HR practitioner, all kinds with highlighted verbiage: being born male and claiming male. That's with the birthright, correct. But even for me, and I'm coming from a place, to all of you, just like Julie and Jeff are, from a place of vulnerability and a place of spirit. And we make mistakes as well. And if we misclassify or misgender someone, don't be afraid to apologize. That's the number one thing. So with me, I'm still educating myself, and I'm a part of the LGBT community. What does it mean going forward for the different generations, which opens up another can of worms? Mm-hmm. So we have, what does sex mean? What does gender mean? Gender identity. I recommend that everybody on this podcast go in and introduce terms to them that will make a difference in other people's lives. So it's too much information to go line by line, but let me tell you, it is important. I'm also going to tell you that there's a story that I live by, and what guided me either to come out or to be the best HR professional or the mental health professional that I could be, and that is the old man and the starfish story. Does anybody know about that? And I had this in my office next to my computer, and I'm going to read it for you. It's the old man and the starfish. The old man walked along the beach and came across a young boy who was throwing something starfish in the ocean in the breaking waves. Upon closer inspection, the old man could see that the boy was tossing standard starfish from the sand beach back into the shallows. "What are you doing, young man?" he asked knowingly. "Don't you know you can't make a difference to all these dying starfish?" The boy looked up and threw another starfish. "I just made a difference to that one." Remember that the impact that we have and using correct pronouns makes a difference to that one. Sometimes that's all it takes. And in an organization, especially with the impact that human resources have, we are no longer the paper pushers. We're the culture leaders. We're their voice. We're their advocacy and awareness coaches. So what are we doing in our organizations to help push that? And it's not just a phase. It's not just a time when we're going to celebrate Pride Month. It should be celebrated all year.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask a question, because obviously, and James, we've talked about this at length quite a bit on some of these topics. I'm a huge advocate of individuality and sovereignty. Why, though, is this a topic that is at the forefront of all the priorities that are around this topic and around this community? What is it about pronouns that's elevated to back to changing culture? Why is this something that's kind of reaching the top? There's a lot of different elements that could go into this, and there's a lot of complexity, even regardless of the LGBT community, around gender. Right. So why is this particular piece important to the cause? And of all the ways that we're investing HR and people resources, how do we kind of filter out organization from a leadership perspective to do that? Because I think I think details are very important, and this is one of those things that are very important to individual people. But how do we and details matter to add up to consistent, massive change? but we're looking to make big changes now with level of connection. I think there's an opportunity to talk through this a bit more. So I'd love to hear Julie and Jeff's thoughts on this too, because I think you really set a really important topic here, James.
Yeah, you asked, why are pronouns sort of the topic? Is that the question? Yeah. I think part of it is because it's hard for a lot of folks to understand it.
Yeah.
So they talk a lot about it, right? And not a lot of times it's not spoken about in positive, if you will, terms. But it also affects everyone. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that, if I don't, if somebody wants to be, somebody has different pronouns, for example, than what I'm used to, then that burden, if you will, or perceived burden falls upon me. So to make sure that I get that right. So I think that people who maybe, and I don't mean this too negatively, but maybe uneducated folks or folks who maybe aren't as inclusive or that haven't been exposed to this conversation as to why it's important.
Yeah.
I think that's partly why you see this in the news and in conversations so much. And it's not easy, right? To change minds, because oftentimes the things that we don't understand are the things that we question obviously the most. And but I agree with the importance of getting those things right, getting those pronouns right, because I mean it is a literal matter of life and death to people.
Yeah, you're right. And are you ready for this? So here's the neuroscience behind why pronouns matter.
Okay.
Our brains are constantly trying to figure out through our emotional center in our brain, and not the conscious part, kind of the unconscious part. Do I belong here? Is this part of my group? Is this friend or foe? Do I flee or stay and fight? You may not think that way, but that's the way our brains are constantly scanning the environment. And just like when someone calls you by your name and says, Jeff, it's so good to have you here, a boost of dopamine and oxytocin, all the feel-good neurochemicals you get when you sit down to your favorite meal or you see someone you love get off a plane. Your brain doesn't know the difference. It just makes you feel safe, welcomed, and the signal your brain gets is, I belong here. When someone uses pronouns that matter to me, that I identify with, I get the same boost of dopamine and oxytocin across my brain. And my brain literally tells me physiologically, it's okay for you to be here. It's safe for you to be here. And as organizations, that's the very first thing we need before we can engage, re-engage, retain, and really grow and develop our workforce. If it doesn't feel safe or look safe, then our people's brains say it's not safe. Signals, symbols, and words matter.
So I agree with what you said, and thank you for the explanation. I think it's very helpful to understand that the neuropsychology of that, Jeff. And I also, and I think the topic of this is beyond pride. So it's not just the LGBTQIA community. There's all different groups that are underserved and under-accessed and underappreciated or given the opportunity to feel safe, to belong. I guess my question that I personally struggle with at times, and I'm an advocate for this, is how it feels sometimes it's complicated. It requires a lot of education. It requires us to step in levels of uncomfortable landmines, and unintentionally people can be offended. And you're right, it requires a level of effort to get it right. But at the same time, if we're trying to truly appeal to the group, back to my hat, why would we not focus as a group on unconditional love, on unconditional respect, on the idea that we all need to come from that point of view, regardless of whatever community or identity we have? How do we make that the table stakes so that we are truly cultivating a sense of all belonging and not feeling excluded? Because even the fact that there's a level of intellectual disconnect, how do we get more from the heart is my question. How do we make this conversation be about, we are all brothers and sisters in humanity, and I care, I have high regard for you no matter what, right? And so wherever you identify with is okay, and I support and love you from a business context and personal perspective. How do we educate on that? Because I think that's something that we have innately in our DNA that is something even more primal than how we've evolved intellectually. And
Exactly. And and here's the short answer. If we do come from a constant intention of unconditional love and unconditional respect, we're less likely to make mistakes because our intent is to be as open, inclusive, and as unconditional as possible. And here's the kicker. When we do learn something new, and it's not a mistake, when we learn that someone's pronouns are different, we're already in the listening mode, the empathetic mode, the I'm ready to adjust mode, and all of the tweaking and adjusting that needs to happen so we don't make that same mistake again and we speak in a way that people can hear us is so much easier. It's the reverse. When we don't have organizations or leaders that come from a place of unconditional love or unconditional respect, then they do have to be taught.
Yeah.
They are going to make a lot of mistakes. And
Yes.
that's the hard route. That's the hard path. Don't do that one.
From a culture champion standpoint in an organization, we took the time out of our busy days to sit and have a conversation and get to know with each individual team member and listen to their stories and understand where they're coming from and where they've been and where they're going and what are their goals and how can we help them get there, what's important to them, what's their favorite candy bar, what's their favorite soda, because those are the things that are going to be bigger than them, that are going to help drive productivity from a corporate standpoint. And there is a reason that listen and silent are the same letters, but just mixed up. Sometimes management and leadership and executives, and we are so busy to have a conversation with the line level about these types of topics. If we don't do that, then there's a disconnect between the higher end and the lower end of organization, and frankly, productivity can suffer for it. Now, what I loved about our organization is our executives took the time out to not stay behind their desk, but to literally go out in the field and take time to have those conversations and to be real and genuine. Sometimes the C-suite, you see them behind closed doors making those type of decisions company-wide that's needed, but you never see their faces. You never see them as humans either. And in order for us to make a difference, one person at a time, like we were talking about, it has to start with a simple conversation. Make them feel wanted and welcome in your organization, no matter who it is. I just recently had a conversation about Juneteenth with somebody, and it totally blew my mind on something that I've never understood. Now I'm educated to go out and help advocate and the awareness for other people on Juneteenth and why the celebrations mean so much to the African-American community. In fact, you'll probably see me walking in parades with Juneteenth because it means that much to me because of the people that I'm with. That means that much to them, their story. And that's what it's about, is touching one life at a time.
Completely agree. So I have a couple thoughts that go down, but I'm going to go down this one because I think there's so much richness. You mentioned the comment, James, about personal stories and amplifying stories. I'd love to hear from each of you a bit about your personal journey of being openly gay and in the environment of corporate, and how that has kind of progressed through your career. There's stop silence there.
Would you? I could start if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this is the vulnerability part, right?
Yeah.
I guess see, being gay for me was never a struggle. And I understand that I'm saying that from a place of privilege, because that is not the experience that a lot of folks have. I was very, very fortunate to have supportive parents, and supportive friends, and also supportive employers my entire career, which, you know, my first job as the VP of HR started at 23. And, you know, I don't remember how I came out, if you will. I don't think it was any kind of, you know, plane with a banner or anything like that. I think my partner at the time was just, I think I brought her with me to an event or something like that. It was just sort of understood, sort of known. And you know, I felt very comfortable talking about it, you know, whenever I sort of needed to. Yeah, I recognize that that is not the experience that a lot of people have had. And I recognize how fortunate I am for that. Now, just fast forward 17 years, right? UKG invites you to bring your whole self to work, yeah, every day. And you know, I went from a smaller organization to a corporate entity, and I wasn't sure how it was going to be. Um, but I also wasn't scared, if that makes sense. You know, being gay is just a part of who I am. It's not all of who I am. And I don't know. I'll tell you what has been really sort of refreshing on this journey, if you will, getting opportunities such as this to even talk about it, and also going to the Pride events and sort of getting back in touch with that whole, I don't know, the whole Pride thing. It's been many years since I went to Pride parades and that kind of thing. So it's been nice to sort of return to those roots, if you will, to have a renewed sense of appreciation for our community, and for how far we've come. I think that is definitely something that I recognize. You know, I think about, why was Indy Pride so much more crowded than, say, even Miami Pride? And the answer to that is, I think a lot of folks in the Midwest, they have one day a year where they feel comfortable being gay. And that day is at Pride. Miami is generally seen as a more inclusive environment. So I think that's definitely something to consider too. Everybody's experience is unique. And I think geography plays a big part of what people's experience is.
That's a great segue into mine. Mine was actually totally the opposite. I'm from northern New Mexico, which is heavily enriched in Roman Catholicism. And the expectation would be, and I went to Catholic school, is to go to the seminary. And with that, I didn't actually come out until I came up to college here in Albuquerque to the University of New Mexico, which then that's when I realized that I lived under a rock for a lot of time and I held a lot of who I was inside me. And when I first saw two people holding hands of the same gender, it almost took me back to, it was unreal. It was like opening the Wizard of Oz magic, and people are dancing and glitter and everything. And I was so celebrated within myself that I actually started crying for the first Pride that I had ever gone to, because of the way that I grew up. This was my life. I'd go to mass in the morning, go to Catholic school, then I would go to catechism thereafter, and then I would go home and pray every day.
James, I went to Catholic school too. I understand.
Yeah. and probably many of our viewers have, and how it's evolved. So when I came up to college here, it was a whole other world, but I didn't necessarily come out all at once. I had different aha moments coming out. And the first time I saw the pride flag, I just thought it was just a symbol. My aha moment was realizing that I represented Stonewall. It represented now the Pulse nightclub and what happened in the histories that could be in history books that people may ban, but they can't ban our stories. They can't ban things that are passed down from LGBT generation to generation. It's not considered just one party for that. There is a reason that we celebrate, and that's because we can be who we are for those days. Now it's a month. You know, hopefully future generations, they won't have to be introduced as, oh, this is James, he's gay. We just are introduced as people, just like normal, right? So that's my story.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's so telling, you know, that we come out in different ways. Like Julie, I came out early. I came out at 19, a white cisgender male, even though I identify as gay. And so I have a lot of privilege and a lot of opportunities. But I think, you know, you keep coming out. When I was in my late 30s, I had a really great HR career. I decided I wanted to move from the company where I was leading HR and go to a different one and lead labor relations and union negotiations and kind of get in a different industry. And so I did, and went through the whole interview process. And this is before Facebook. So even though it was my hometown, like nobody I met really knew me. And I looked for signals of, it's okay to be gay at their workplace or the people I talked to. I didn't see anything, but it didn't seem like an unfriendly place. Actually, it's very friendly. I went through the entire application process, pre-screening interviews, assessment tests, meeting with a psychologist, going to meet with the people I would lead as 13 HR generalists across the country. And then, I was told, we would like to offer you the job. Your final step is to meet with the president of the company. He wants to meet with you for breakfast, Bob Evans. He's a military academy grad and a retired military vet. He's not like crusty and angry, but he's a whiz with data and engineering. He calculates things really fast in his head, and he just wants to go, go, go. So that's the kind of person you're going to meet with. So I went to have breakfast with him, and I sat down, introduced myself. We ordered coffee. And before things got started, I said, look, I really appreciate everything that's happened so far, and I love your organization. But there's one thing I need you to know before we move forward. And I reached in my coat pocket and pulled out a paper photograph. Yes, a paper photograph. And I slid it across the table next to his coffee cup. And I said, so these are the most important people to me. The person on the left is Bob. That's my husband. And we've been together over 17 years. And that little 3-year-old boy that's brown skinned, that's our son, Adam, that we adopted from Cambodia a little over just under 3 years ago. 2 things I want to know. One is the workplace and where I'm going to be leading HR with you and everybody else going to be okay with this? And 2, if it's not okay, I want you to know I don't want this job because I don't want to be a disruptor to whatever your culture looks like right now. Now, I know that sounds like very apologetic, dismissive, deferential language, and it was. And I think that comes from what Julie and I mentioned, which is I knew I could get another HR job. I'm a person who has a graduate degree and 15 years experience anyway, but I was willing to put it all on the line and come out again from scratch for this job. So the president picked up the photograph and looked at it. He turned it around and pushed it back across the table to me. And he said, I promise you, this is not going to be a problem and you're going to love it here. And I did. I loved that workplace, even though there were fewer than 2 out people in the corporate office. And I was one of them. But this notion that your employees and coworkers and peers come out every day. They come out not just as LGBTQ+, but out of being a caregiver for a senior citizen parent at home. They come out as a person who's been through some kind of trauma. And so we need to make our workplaces, as Derek said, unconditionally loving and unconditionally respectful, with mentors and guides and people to help everyone know it's okay for you to bring your whole self to work, even if and we make it safe enough for you to come out about whatever that is for you.
To piggyback on that, Jeff, to your point about your whole self, I was actually demoted in the 90s for being gay.
Wow.
Something that now in this day and age, thankfully, we've been progressive enough to realize equality and inclusive and being diverse. But I was demoted from a generalist to a specialist because my corporation found out that I was seeing a male. So, and I had no other recourse back in the day. But I'm proud that human resources has evolved over the different generations and over the decades for people such as people on this webinar and podcast, for allies and for people that can help support us to progress within ourselves and within our organizations to make creative changes. And back then, all I can think of in speaking mental health therapist, all I think of is, I just don't want to live on this earth anymore. If people aren't going to accept me for who I am in the organizations, and my family is Roman Catholic and all of that, why am I put on here? That's when I realized, wait a minute, if you're, like you said, rebel, like we're on Rebels here, Rebel with a Heart, then you have to make your own changes and you have to be the driving factor for others to follow. So that's my story on how I got demoted. And it actually motivated me to continue on and to go against the grain and to use the oppression that we have all heard about or we've all felt as a success story going forward. And many of us, even on this podcast, may have those type of stories. And the transition from personnel to human resources have over time changed the conversations to allow people like me to still thrive and be on a call today to talk about it.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. First off, I thank you all for sharing these stories. Jeff, I want to say I didn't hear any deferential language at all in your story. I heard a lot of courage because that's pretty bold by any standard to sit down and have that conversation and lay it on the line. So I want to acknowledge that. And I have a question about that culture too, which I'll come back to in a moment. And then James, similarly, like my heart literally breaks for you and for so many people that have experienced that level of pain in an environment where we spend so much of our time, right? And so that's really and I know that that's just a symptom, right? That's just one small example of so many, right? And it's something that personally I feel a sense of responsibility for on behalf of so many other leaders and companies and cultures to be helping to eliminate that particular aspect, right? Because that's regardless of however you identify and whatever your community, whatever your background, that someone has to experience that at work or beyond any environment it's just inhumane, right? I mean, I think that's really the shift of the culture that we're talking about. And so to that point, I kind of coming back, and Julie, I welcome your thoughts on this in just a moment, but Jeff, you said something about that was interesting, that president, we hear a lot about the consciousness of leadership affecting the culture and consciousness of an organization. How was it that you felt so loved and belonging and cared for in that culture when there was still such a minority of openness and like, what was it about it? Because that's an interesting contrast that you gave.
It is. Yeah.
Right?
So there's two things. One is the president, and I'll attribute this to his military experience, probably his family as well, but he had that unconditional respect perspective. He saw every person through a lens of respect first. And you really had to violate that a lot before he would give up or see you in a different way. That trickled down. The second thing is, this was a manufacturing company with 13 locations all across the US. They were all in rural communities. The plants were relatively small, fewer than 200 or 300 people. Everyone felt close to each other, even if they were really different. And culturally, sexual orientation, gender identity, you name it. Everyone felt like they were neighbors. And the culture of that small town, we're all in this together. And even though you're from corporate, really permeated everything. That matched my personality, the way I communicate, and other types of organizations I've worked in before. And so in that sense, I fit in. I know it sounds weird, but there was enough safety in camaraderie and friendship and small community approaches for me to feel welcomed in every location, even though I knew there were some people there who, based on their religion or their faith or their own, whatever it is, like they did not agree or want to be around LGBTQ people, but they did because there was a culture. What's interesting is this is early 2000s, before LifeGuides existed, before it was easy to reach out to a mentor or someone who had already gone through a similar experience to figure out how to connect with the new VP of HR, who's nothing like me and nothing like our community, but I want to welcome them. So I credit that culture of ultimate respect kind of permeating that organization long before I got there as the runway for me to feel safe and for me to build relationships. But I also know how unique it is or was, and that LifeGuides and reaching out and finding people who can help you with what's new, unfamiliar, or challenging for you is so important to every organization today.
Thank you for expanding on that. It's really important. And I think one thing you said it was coming to before was just this concept of love thy neighbor, right? That is the single biggest element. And I think the other part that's relevant in the context of leadership, which I know is something you talk a lot about, is that concept of shared purpose, that shared hard work, that grit, that camaraderie that brings people together. That's something that is the responsibility of business to forge that, so that those differences can be explored with a sense of curiosity, respect, and love. And I believe that's the case. And so I think I would love for you to share, each of you to share some just kind of practical things that you would recommend or you see happening kind of in businesses and the culture that are happening, that are moving this along. That I think the biggest thing is it still feels to me that we're very early on in this process for corporate and companies and for leaders and for teams to really truly allow people's whole self to be at work. And we talk a lot about it, but the actions and to your point, what you see outward and what you see inward don't necessarily match. And I think we're really still working through that. But at least for starting, I believe there's a real shift that's happening. So maybe you have some practical suggestions and ideas for steps that companies, wherever they are on their consciousness journey, as we'll call it, how can we do better? How can we start? How can we, keep going?
Two things. It starts at the top. I think that's definitely definitely something. And Jeff learned that when he had his conversation, he had the conversation with the person at the top, and just how important that is. Oftentimes, from an HR perspective, even if HR folks want to make a change, sometimes it's difficult for them because of the pushback that they get from executives and leadership, and maybe folks who have been around for 30, 40, 50 years and, sort of see things the way they see things, and no, we don't want to celebrate Pride Month and that kind of thing. So I think acknowledging that, that it's not just as simple as saying, oh, today we're going to change our culture, right? It's a process. I think it's a continual process. And I think that process never ends. I think it's something that companies need to be intentional and purposeful about, in terms of perpetuating that feeling of, yes, you can bring your whole self to work. Yes, this is a safe space. You can be who you are here. So that's the first thing I would say. It starts at the top. And in terms of how you sort of fix that, I don't know. It's tough. But I think it starts with having conversations and education also, explaining why it's important. I think the other thing that's important is to have employee resource groups at organizations. That's one way that organizations can really start to make changes to show that they care about their employees. And it's not just for LGBTQ plus people. There's employee resource groups for lots and lots of underrepresented groups, and also there's at large organizations, there's local ERGs. I mean, lots and lots of places where employees can come together and congregate and talk about the topics that are important to them, but also for allies to show that they are allies, and to show their support for those individuals. And I've seen at my organization that the ERGs are very, very powerful in terms of the togetherness that they allow. So those would be my recommendations. It doesn't have to be on a large scale. Smaller companies can also have employee resource groups as well.
Thank you, Julie.
I'll add on to Julie's. She actually took the very first one, as it starts at the top. I think all of us in the LGBT, that's where we look for first, right? To see if we're accepted, like in Jeff's story. But I would also add that as human resources professionals and CEOs and managers, know that your jobs are now in the realm of advocacy and awareness yourselves. And what that means is what you do matters, then it'll trickle down and affect the rest of us. And how you act and how you react to situations, or Pride Month or Juneteenth or anything like that, is how your organization and the population is going to follow. And if you don't care much for it, well, then guess what? You're probably not going to attract creative minds to make it diverse, the DE&I that you need. And what I love about human resources now is we're involving those conversations with mental health, with DE&I, and doing things differently than we've done in the past. And we're evolving. To Julie's point, these bigger organizations are actually being creative on having those conversations. And I was always told, if not you, who? If not now, when? To have those conversations. And HR professionals, I challenge you to have the I'm going to use a New Mexico term, the strength and the cojones to go out and have those conversations with those that need it the most, because those are the people that may be the naysayers or the blockers in order for diversity to happen in your organizations. You have to have those conversations. And to Julie's point, it could take a day, a month, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but someone has to have those conversations to open minds.
So I will say yes to Julie, yes to James. You must do all those things, whether you're an HR professional or a leader in an organization or just the leader of a team. Those, you cannot lose with those. I'm going to add to that a individual or personalized kind of approach. The culture is really just a mirror. It's a reflection of how people are treated and what's really going on here already. And how people reach out and treat each other in small groups, on their teams, or an HR person to a manager or leader or employee makes a difference. And when I worked at a large aluminum company, my husband Bob and I, we're in a rural part of Western Kentucky. We tried to adopt, and our first adoption fell through. The day before the child was born, the birth mother changed her mind. That's her right in an open adoption state. And if you're an adoptive parent listening to this, you know this is very common. But the first time it happens, it's devastating. My close colleagues and coworkers in the HR department knew we were trying to adopt, and several of them came over to the house the day it happened and were very supportive. Here's the kicker. I decided to go back to work the next day, and I should not have done that. I was not in an emotional state to do that. My boss saw me fumbling around, trying to get in the groove that wasn't happening. And they said, why don't you just go home until you're ready to come back? And it's okay that you have to go through this. What happened, all these people that I didn't know knew we were trying to adopt, reached out, sent cards, dropped by the house. It's the individual communication or signal that I know you're going through something difficult, or you're not able to bring all of who you are to work, but it's okay with me. And I want you to know that I care. Just the unconditional care with no expectation of return. That's what will take all the things that Julie and James shared and make them come to life. So if you're an HR professional, how do you demonstrate that? How do you model that in a very authentic way? If you're the leader of a small team, do you know who's hurting on your team? Who needs a card sent home? Who's really grappling with something that's going on in their life outside of work that is keeping them from focusing at work? And how do you help acknowledge that and make it easier for them to be a human at work?
Wow, that was a powerful statement. And Jeff, I mean, that is literally the reason why LifeGuides exists. And I think that's part of why we're all here, is to help raise awareness for the leaders and the people and the cultures that we want to intentionally create, addressing exactly that. So I'll just kind of open it up with a closing moment, if you will. We have a few minutes left, and the reality is we could spend hours talking with this. I just want to first off say that thank you to all of you for educating our audience. I think there is so much to be done. Even as I mentioned in the beginning, myself, I'm learning so much just from this conversation, and I hope to talk with each of you more, because I think, to your point, it starts with CEOs, it starts with boards, it starts with really putting action behind the words. And so I am personally responsible for that. So I want to invite you to help me on that journey, and I hope the cause and the mission of what we're talking about around inclusivity and how we do that. So when you have a moment, just share with us your final thought for today, and what you want the audience to remember about your time in your life.
Since I started first in the beginning, I'll close first. I think that for me personally, I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, because I've had major successes. I want people to support me and to help me move along to be the best me that I can be, through mentorship, through peership, through professionalism, through networking, through guidance, through just today, Julie and Jeff, I feel like I have a connection with them. If I have a situation within myself that needs those type of things answered, I could reach out to any one of them. And that's what it's about. It's about the networking, but also the increasing your spirit and allowing yourself to feel and be your whole self going to work. Now, I also opened it up by talking about LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. We make a lot of connections, but it's just words, right? It's just a website with people's pictures. Make sure that you utilize it to its fullest effect. And I go on there and I look at organizations. Being a retired human resources professional, not only to educate myself, but to help spread the word of what organizations are inclusive for people like me. And one is Southwest Airlines. If you look at the Southwest Airlines comments on the description of the organization, and I actually printed it to share with everybody because it made an impact on me, a powerful impact. And it says, at Southwest Airlines, we connect people to what's important in their lives. That also means connecting our employees to what's important in their lives. Mm-hmm. Our employees value the opportunity to work hard, be creative, and have fun on the job. By fostering culture that embraces and utilizes our diversity, we create competitive advantages in teamwork and innovation that contribute to our overall success. For my personal story, I will look at this organization and I'm drawn to it. And being retired, I may apply to Southwest Airlines because this is speaking my language as to who I am and what I've been through. So use LinkedIn to the fullest advantage that you can for your organization, and put on there for your organization something like this that can connect to your team members and employees. I use the word team members because it is a team, right? I'm getting the job done, and it takes multiple people to get you where you need to be. So thank you, Southwest Airlines, for this. And I may apply, you never know.
Thanks, James. Thanks for joining us on Rebels with a Heart.
My closing idea is it's not rocket science. None of this is really hard. It's just brain science. Do what you can to make your workplaces safe, open, and to reflect the kind of human interaction and humans at work that we all really are. And if you're an HR pro, don't go at this alone, and your employees don't have to do this alone. Between LifeGuides and other resources, there is expertise. There are people out there who can help make being human at work a lot easier.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for joining us in Rebels with a Heart. Julie.
I will just close by saying, first of all, thank you. This was a great conversation. We've made a lot of strides, but we're not 100% there yet. I think that's something else to remember too. So, our experiences, largely, there's been challenges along the way, but largely positive, but just recognize that our experiences aren't everyone's experience. So, making sure that you're recognizing individuals at work, individual folks in terms of what their unique needs are, I think is very important. And, mental health, that conversation is no longer taboo. So, all of this sort of weaves in together. And I think it's important for us to remember that really that human connection, that heart to heart connection, that, hey, I see you and I hear you and I'm here for you. What do you need from me? Those kind of conversations are extremely important in today's environment and could make all the difference for attracting and retaining top talent, LGBTQ plus and otherwise. So I would just, I'd end there. Thank you.
Thank each of you for joining us today again. Thank you for sharing your heart, your vulnerability, your stories. Thank you for having a hard conversation in certain ways, right? Asking the hard questions that need to happen. That's how we make progress. That's how we understand each other. It's how we connect. And so thank you for allowing me to be humbly your host today and to learn with you. So for our audience, thank you as well for joining us and investing your time and your hearts in this mission and this purpose. And we look forward to seeing you at future Rebels events. Have a wonderful day, everyone.